Hey, welcome to Conversations with my dear friend, Jeff Conway. My name is Susan. This is A Different Kind of Walk. Today we are privileged to be speaking with American novelist and memoirist Marie Mutsuki Mockett, as well as my friend Juston Wolgemuth, who is a professional counselor now, but was featured as a key character in one of Marie's books back when he was a college student. That book is called American Harvest: God, Country, and Farming in the Heartland, and we'll be focusing on it today. American Harvest discusses grain production, religion, history, and the cultural divide in the United States, and it begins with this question around food. Why do city dwellers, who are stereotypically disconnected from the land, want organic food, while farmers, who are stereotypically more religious and science-averse, prefer genetically modified crops? Marie joins us today from San Francisco, and Juston joins us from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Enjoy the episode. So I could easily just read the back of the book cover to give people a quick idea of the context for this book that we're going to be talking about, but I would rather hear it from you two. So Marie, can you tell us about yourself and how you came to be connected to the farm in Nebraska and how this book came about?
Sure. So I'm Marie Mutsuki Mockett, and I was born in California. I have my parents have passed away, but my mother was from Japan. My father was American, and my father used to joke that he was a rare breed, born in California, but moved back to Nebraska and grew up in Nebraska from the time that he was 7 till he left to go to college. And his parents grew up in Nebraska, and their parents had wheat farms. So my father inherited this wheat farm, which I've now inherited. And even though I grew up in California, my father would go back to Nebraska every summer for the wheat harvest, and sometimes other times of the year to check on the fields. And so that's how I have this, what they call a coastal upbringing, but I was connected to the farm in Nebraska, and I would spend my summer going to Japan with my mother and then going to Nebraska for the wheat harvest. And became a writer. That was what I always really wanted to do. And at a certain point, after living in New York for a while, I suddenly thought nobody in New York City has any idea what a farm actually is or what it is that farmers actually do. And there was a summer when I was maybe in my 30s. And I was at Harvest with my father, and I was listening to all of these people talk and watching what was going on. And I thought, wow, this would make a really interesting topic for a book. I don't think this has been written about. And I think at that time, Whole Foods had just opened in New York City. And I'd been listening to my father kind of complain about organic food for most of my life. And he was very skeptical of organic food. And so I just realized that there was this a lack of understanding around some of these subjects. And so that was really kind of the origin of wanting to write about the farm and wanting to write about the farmers, and probably also satisfy my own curiosity because I realized I didn't know who the people were who actually did the actual physical labor on the farm. And Justin's father, Eric, is a farmer from Pennsylvania, but also has cut our family's wheat for, well, it's probably got to be close to 30 years now. And so knew our fields, certainly better than I do. And at a certain point was kind of interested in this idea of writing about the farm, but also because he was acutely aware from crisscrossing the country of what we commonly call the cultural divide. So I'm just going to use that term for a kind of shorthand. And always wanting to talk to me about it. Justin's father's an enormously curious person. He was not reading books at the time that I wrote mine. I think he reads books now. So he had a lot of just very natural intellectual curiosity, but he was, he's not a person who went to college or probably was ever interested in going to college. But certainly because of the way that I was raised, I always thought he was incredibly intelligent and interesting. My dad was a very I don't like to use the word open-minded. I mean, he was very open-minded, but he just he had such a broad view of work and what work is and what people do because of the farm, I think, and just also because of the generation that he was. So that's sort of the origin of it. And then we had the election in 2016, and that kind of accelerated the desire for all of us to work together to, see if it was possible to have communication across this gap that's in our country.
So, did your father or grandfather ever harvest the wheat themselves, or was it always in those generations passed out to a harvester to do that for you?
I only remember custom harvesters coming through, and I'm not sure if my grandfather ever had harvesting equipment. Now, his father, my great grandfather, might have. I don't know that there's anyone I could left who I could ask. I mean, that's one of the things I do talk a little bit about in American Harvest is the equipment, which has become so expensive and so really sophisticated. So I mean the like the original great grandfather, great great grandfather, they might have done their own harvesting because I don't know that the work of hiring people to come and harvest wheat. I think that becomes popular after the war, if I remember correctly, and that's the point at which the machinery becomes even more complicated. So I'm kind of guessing,
Okay.
um, but certainly they were out farming, planting and
So,
all of that.
Justin, for you, you've always been around machinery for harvesting then?
hmm Yeah, I started, I think the year I was born, I think I went on harvest with the family. Um,
Uh,
and we always got out of school every May or so to tag along with my parents and the crew.
okay.
And did that every year till I was 20. And then, of course, went again in 2017 when the book was written. In 2018 was the last time I went. So it's been a
Okay.
couple of
So I
years
do
now, but
have distinct memories of going to your family's trailer and Emily opening the door and there were two little two little
yeah.
kids in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she would like prepare breakfast and then take care of me and my brother and then make lunch and take it to the field and take care of me and my brother and then make dinner and take it to the field and take care of me and my brother. So it was, she had probably the hardest job on the crew those years.
And I think I gleaned from the book she also did like laundry for the crew. Is that correct?
I think she, if it's if it's gonna rain or something, she'll like pull the laundry in if it's hanging on the
Okay.
wash line. But yeah, she keeps after the guys like that, and is she's really the moral support. Uh,
Mhm.
Without her, morale definitely goes down. But I mean, it's kind of dawned on me in recent years that I spent essentially a third of my formative years in the Midwest. So
Mhm.
like I'm more of a Midwest kid. I've heard it said the Bible Belt begins in Lancaster County, so like I'm arguably in the Midwest anyway. But like yeah, every summer I was in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, or Nebraska or Idaho. So like it has really shaped who I am.
So, Justin, you're in Lancaster County. I'm
Correct.
in Paoli, Malvern now, so I'm not far from you at all. But when you talk about your upbringing, so you're definitely not Amish, but what was your early schooling days? Where did that happen? In the public schools or a Mennonite school? How did that work in your community?
I always went to public school. There are a lot of Mennonite schools around here, but yeah, I did public school the whole way through. I grew up in a Brethren in Christ church, so within the Anabaptist stream. There's like jokingly, and maybe not so jokingly, like distinctions or tension seems too strong a word, but the differences between the BIC and the Mennonite, though they are slight, do sometimes like cause friction, or at least have over the years. So functionally, I often tell people I'm Mennonite. So that's more my identity, but loosely Anabaptist.
Okay. And Marie writes about you going off to college or coming from college. So are you comfortable sharing what that school was, even though it's probably not the University of Oregon that's 10-1 and number 5 in the football polls now?
Yeah, I went to Cairn University in Bucks County, so
Okay.
outside of Philly, and lived the last 10 years in the Philly region there.
So that used to be Philadelphia School of the Bible or College of the Bible or
Yeah, it was Philadelphia College of the Bible, and then it was Philadelphia Biblical University, and then it was Cairn University.
And
okay.
before that, it was the Philadelphia Bible Institute. It's
When it
gone
was in Philly.
it's gone through like 4 different names.
It's
Yeah,
probably why you don't have a good football team because you've changed names so often people didn't know
yeah,
how to find it.
right.
And
Well,
Oregon,
no football team.
University of Oregon has always been the University of Oregon. So
I
I
know.
guess you can tell where I went to school.
I went to the same school and I do find it interesting. I don't know, I'm not objective on this topic at all. But the book that we're talking about in this discussion mostly focuses on this particular section of evangelical Christianity, and which is Anabaptists, and with like a slight foray into the Mormon side of
Mhm.
Christianity. But the Anabaptist world is actually a very small portion of evangelical Christianity and an even smaller portion of like all of Christianity. And so like I just remember this, and this is where I'm not sure if I'm objective. Like when I was in school, when I was at college, I remember going through a church history class, and they're talking about the Reformation, like the Church Reformation, and they're talking about Luther and Zwingli and these different people who were leaders in this movement. And there's this one little tiny paragraph in this history book that is about Anabaptists, and it's specifically the gist of this paragraph essentially just says that Anabaptists aren't Christians.
Oh, wow.
Like
Wow.
this was how I came to even hear the first term Anabaptist when I was in college.
Mm,
It was just like, no, y'all don't count. Like we so in the same way
mm.
that a lot of Christians will say like Mormons aren't Christian
Yeah.
or Catholics aren't Christian, like according to this little paragraph in my history book, neither are Anabaptists. So like yeah, it is an interesting dynamic for sure.
These were all things that Justin had to explain to me. Um, my husband is from Scotland, and he, his wonderful Auntie Jessie, who was raised Protestant, married a Catholic. And when Auntie Jessie married Uncle Dan, apparently this caused a lot of commotion within the family, and their father never spoke to her again because she married a Catholic. And so for me, from the outside, I thought it was all Christian, so I don't understand. I didn't, and I would learn my European history and my English history, and you hear about these wars between the Protestants and the Catholics, which I also didn't
Yeah.
understand. And then Justin would say, "Well, you know about the Reformation," and I would sort of think, "Well, I've heard of it. Yeah, there was something to do with the Gutenberg press." I mean, I really didn't have a very good context for understanding any of these issues. And so it was one of the great gifts I think out of this project was getting like a much better understanding of history and the history of Christianity and Christianity as a lived way of life. But do you
Mm.
remember that, Justin, having to tell me over and over again about the Reformation? And I would look it up and then I would sort of intellectually understand it, but not really understand it.
hmm Well, yeah, and it kind of in your world to speak generally, like
Hmm.
Christian would just kind of mean one thing,
Yes.
and that was particularly when I was in college, I was most steeped in some of the history and was probably more knowledgeable on it then than I am now. But that really kind of was like, no, there are different versions here. And like,
Yeah.
I think some are better than others, and like some
Yeah.
seem to be really bad and some to be really good. So I remember that kind of as the main push of it to say like,
Yeah, and my family didn't necessarily know. I remember asking my uncle about the harvesters, not the harvesters, the farmers, and I think they're the Knowles in the book. And I remember them saying, my uncle saying, "Well, I think they're Mennonite," or I think everything was Mennonite, because nobody, well, they wear bonnets and when the women wear skirts, so that must be Mennonite. There was no sort of, nobody really understood what any of the differences were, or any of the granularity.
right.
So
Yeah, and if you go back in the tradition somewhere, I'm sure that it overlapped. Um,
Hey, listeners, I feel the need to interrupt here because we're throwing around a lot of terms: Anabaptist, Mennonite, Brethren in Christ, and I want to explain some things so that you have the right visuals in your head. The term Anabaptist means rebaptizers, and it shows up in Europe after Constantine made Christianity the religion of the state. And to be baptized and named as an infant made you a citizen of the state. Anabaptists started rebaptizing people as adults, people who wanted to choose to follow Jesus, specifically Jesus' teachings around nonviolence. And they were relentlessly slaughtered for doing so because it threatened the state, which is why the paragraph in my history book that I mentioned said that Anabaptists aren't Christians. Now, after a lot of history and moving around, at this point, there are a few different denominations inside the Anabaptist camp: Mennonites, Amish, Hutterites, and the Brethren in Christ, mainly. Sometimes the terms Anabaptist and those denominations get used synonymously, but Anabaptist is the umbrella term, and that's how they're connected. Now, there are Anabaptists all over the world. And yeah, some are white people and drive buggies with horses and wear bonnets and long beards. And some look like me and have tattoos and live in the city. And still others are native to Ethiopia and Indonesia and Paraguay and have completely different looks and cultures. So today, just so you have it in your head, Juston is sitting here wearing a baseball cap and a long sleeve t-shirt. And he typically keeps his blonde beard and mustache short and wears trendy glasses. His mom, Emily, I know, has never worn a head covering to church or plain dresses. And by contrast, since that's what this book is all about, Marie is sitting in this interview with her gorgeous Asian American face, dark eyes behind red-rimmed glasses, black hair piled up on her head, in an office filled with books and paintings. And it's the contrast between these two people, Marie and Juston, the friendship and mutual understanding that they've developed despite our country's divisions, that makes this book worth reading. So, let's get back to the interview.
yeah, no, I didn't know what any of this was or how to differentiate, and had never inquired.
I
So
I think we're in a reformation right now. So
I hope so.
when you're looking, when I went to seminary and said I would never join a denomination because of the Reformation, because of all the killing over, did you rebaptize a person, communion, separate. There were just so many horrible things that separated people. And then I got to seminary and realized if I want to actually work in a church, I need to pick one of these places. When you look back at the Reformation, yes, it was about 100 years. I think now the same thing is happening, so there's not a point that you can say this happened in 1977 or but I think in 100 years or so, people will be looking at this time period and calling it the Second Reformation. Not as
Interesting.
Hopefully it's not as unhealthy as the first one, that it was all about leaving because of one issue or two issues. People just kept leaving. And that grieves me for you, Marie, as you're writing this book, that the witness of God-loving humanity should not be all the judgment and division that happens. I'm preaching, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's interesting because Eric, Justin's father, often says to me, often talks about what he sees as increased, maybe division's the wrong word, but that there's like a real tension within the Christian worlds over what Christianity should be and what it truly is, which is actually kind of one of the questions that I think American Harvest asks, because that's certainly what I think was taught to me or what I experienced. Um, and this is so rarely written about in mainstream media. I feel like maybe we're starting to see a little bit of it, but it's very difficult for mainstream media to understand or be sensitive to or even recognize that this is a pretty significant issue. So, I mean, we know that there are always social changes going on around us that may or may not be reported upon in kind of mainstream outlets, but I mean that's a very fascinating idea that there would be another Reformation. I mean, there's some people who say this is another Great Awakening, right? I've read that. But that again is not something that mainstream media necessarily covers, partly because I don't think that there's a language or an ability to report on this or write about this.
Justin, before we move on, can you actually, I'm not sure our audience will have a specific picture in their head when they think about Lancaster County.
Yeah, Lancaster County is we have a lot of farmland, but we also have a lot of suburbs, and Lancaster City is like it's not Philadelphia or anything, but it's like a substantial city. So it is civilization, but we still have a lot of farmland. The farms are much smaller than out west, like where we went on harvest, but
The
uh,
soil is much better too.
it's very good
Mm.
soil. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's part of the actually our friend that works in for a organization that preserves farmland here in the area, and that's kind of their push that it's like we've got some of the best land in the world. Like we should
Mhm.
really be intentional about what we develop and what we don't develop. Um,
Mhm.
Culturally, though, the Anabaptist, the Mennonite thing is very strong, and so my high school was like a public school, but like I was in the Bible study at the school, and which I don't know, maybe schools everywhere have Bible studies, but I'll sometimes say that it was basically a Christian school. It was public school, but I felt there was a Christian vernacular and stuff. I don't know.
It was public school, but all your teachers and your students like went to church.
Probably, yeah, and like who knows? Like if some random high school teacher of mine would hear this and think, "Well, I didn't," like I don't know, but I'm sure that happened too. But
Your area also is like a horse and buggy area too, right? So you have,
uh yeah, yeah, we
yeah.
have some neighbors here that are Amish, and actually, my dad's become friends with some of the
Mhm.
Amish around here, as he does. Makes friends with everybody.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, so I've never asked you. Like my parents' ranch in Nebraska is 1,000 acres. And thanks to Marie's actual description in the book, I have this idea that like an acre is like a football field. So their land is like 1,000 football fields all
Mhm.
put together. Um, and at one point they had around 3,000, but they were raising cattle, not crops. And you need a certain amount of land per in order to feed a certain amount of cattle. So blah blah blah. Nebraska land is also way worse for farming, as you already said. So you need a lot of it in order to yield a certain amount of crops. How does that compare to your family's homestead? Like how big is it? And I know you raise crops, but like kind of like what's the size here?
mhm. Our homestead here is something like 100 acres, give or take. But we farm a lot more than that in the county. And my dad said that this year for fall harvest, it was something like 2,000 acres or a little bit over that. So that's pretty big for here in this area, but for the Midwest, it would still be not a big farm by any means.
Hmm. Yeah, so I say 1,000 acres of mine, and that's small. Like that is a
Mhm.
very small ranch where I'm from. So, so you have like around 100 acres, but then that juts up right against someone else's plot of land, right? Because I've only
Mhm.
been to your house once, but it feels, as far as the look and the scenery and the landscape, it feels similar to when I go home. Like you're in the country.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, also my high school was 10 minutes away, and just over the ridge there's a development. So that yeah, Lancaster County kind of is that way that it can feel very rural, but you're never too far away from Walmart or
Mhm.
a grocery store. Hopefully we're getting an Aldi soon.
And I will say that's the difference. That is the main difference for me when I go to Lancaster County versus when I go home to my parents' place. The closest Walmart for me is an hour and a half away. So for me, it's very, very rural, where you guys get a little bit of both,
Yeah.
seems.
It's definitely a different philosophy around travel and what far is.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
That would be the hardest thing for me if I ever moved back is just like, oh, we're gonna go visit my sister. That is a 4 hour drive one way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And my mom would do that when my sister was in college. She would drive to Omaha, which was 4 hours, just to go shopping with my sister,
Hmm.
and then drive
Hmm.
back in the same day.
Hmm.
And that
Man.
wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Whereas my husband's like, ew, we have to drive like 30 minutes out here in Philadelphia. Ew. Okay, so I'll move on finally to our next question. So there are several things that happen rhythmically in this book. You harvest fields and you visit different churches each week and you have conversations. And the question that you ask, that you come back to consistently, has to do with the cultural divide that you've already mentioned. And sometimes in the book, it's seen as science versus religion. Sometimes it's seen as rural versus city, or Democrat versus Republican, or white people versus people of color. So, Marie, this is another question for you. After going on Harvest and having that
Hmm.
experience and writing this book, what do you feel like is your understanding of the divide now?
Well, it's all those things. Um, I've really thought a lot subsequently. I've thought a lot about geography and work, that where you are geographically, where you are in location, can create a certain sort of culture and then a certain sort of set of accepted beliefs or positions or attitudes. And then you end up with this sort of divide. And there are plenty of exceptions to this, which tell us that this divide is something that is not necessarily, well, it's natural because I just said that I think it's partly dependent on location and dependent on work. But it's also not necessarily natural because there are people who are exceptions to these, what we may think of as rules. And so, that's the piece that I'm more interested in at this point. I'm always interested in like what's the exception and how do people see beyond what they think of as given barriers. But I think it can very much be the case that if one grows up in a specific place and doesn't leave it, and then has this relationship with the land and the work that goes with that land, I think you can become a certain kind of person. Whereas if you're in a different environment, you become another kind of person. So that's kind of how I think about it now. That's not necessarily how other people would think about it. I've never felt confident enough to say this is the American divide. This is what's at the root of it. If I had that sort of confidence, I'm sure I could write like a really great op-ed. Um, but that is how I see it. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think the fact that American Harvest focuses on food and food production is really important. And it was one of the things we talked about early on. The people who are buying food in the city. I mean, there are plenty of people I know who've never raised vegetables, don't know how to weed a garden, et cetera. These are all things that I was taught by both my parents. And then you have the people who are actually producing the food, driving the trucks to bring the food into the city, live a completely different life than the people who are primarily purchasing food. And it's one of the reasons why I think this question of where does food come from is so powerful because it points to this incredibly interdependent relationship that people in this country have, but also people globally have. I mean, this kind of division between who produces the food and who buys the food as a commodity exists pretty much in any developed society anywhere around the world. And just to sort of again bring up the topic of Christianity, I thought it was really interesting rereading how the Bible describes the city, because there are different versions of what the city of God is going to be in the future, right? And is it Ezekiel? You'll all tell me if I'm wrong, but there's a version where the farms are outside the city still, but in the final version, that we're given, depending on the Bible that you accept, when the city of God comes down, the tree of life is inside the city. There aren't any more farms. The food is produced within the city. And I thought that I always remember thinking that was incredibly profound, that somebody hundreds of years ago was already grappling with this question of, well, who makes the food and where does it come from? Because that if everybody gets food and nobody has to work to make the food because it just comes from the tree of life, then this division that we live with now disappears. And it is a way in which people are made to be equal because nobody's hungry, nobody has to do the work of harvesting and delivering the food. And that is the world that we live in now. We live in a world where we can be what we call knowledge workers. I'm in front of my computer with my iPhone, etc. I can drive to my store and get my groceries, but it's a whole other group of people who are raising the food and delivering it, etc. And so I see that as pretty critical.
Mm-hmm. How did being a part of this book affect each of you?
For me, it's like a chronicling of that time in my life and what my own deconstruction experience was like. And just like, I took my faith and do take my faith like really seriously. And it felt like it wasn't working anymore. It felt like it was cracking and breaking, which I'm grateful for now and how my faith is reconstructed. But yeah, it's just a great gift to have that story told from that time in my life. And one of the cool things that I've seen at least is every once in a while Marie will send, hey, here's this email from somebody that read the book. And
I probably get more email for this book than anything else I've written.
Hmm.
And they're very private emails, and they're very often from people in churches,
Yeah.
who want to read something and want to find a way to open up dialogue within their community. There was one that came during the election from one of these counties that everybody was writing about in the news, like which way are they going to vote?
Mm.
And a pastor wrote to me from there to tell me, we're reading your book and we're having these important conversations. And so I'm always really grateful when I get an email like that, and I feel like it's important for me to respond. And I'm happy to know that the book is being read in this way. And I don't write and say which way they should vote. But I feel very moved that people in religious communities are reading the book, and that it's a way for them to have conversation or to have conversation with others. Now, it's not very often, I don't very often hear from what we would think of as the non-religious side. That's a harder audience. When people do read it, they say, wow, I feel like my mind has been changed, or I see the world differently as a result of reading your book. But it's harder to read that sort of book because I think the bias that religion is terrible is so very strong.
Mm.
So that's been interesting. It's made me realize how many people have faith and want to have faith, and they're trying to figure out how to have faith within this very secular world, and that struggle is very, very real and I think of that as very human.
Mm. Yeah, Justin, what were you going to say?
yeah, I think similarly to what you're saying, Marie, but sort of the flip side, I've heard from different friends or like family friends or people from like church growing up having read the book and them saying this gave some word to a sense of like dissonance that I feel, or like or I sometimes say like the character of Justin's struggle with faith kind of gave like give some people the opportunity to say like, I know what you're talking about. I've had that too, or like I'm having that in new ways. So I
I
think
think a
it
lot of people
has
feel that
helped.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
emails that I get say I really love the Justin character. I related to the Justin character. Um, I always think, oh, he's a real person.
I
Um, but
know,
yeah.
I'm sitting here looking at him going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Well, to a certain extent, even when I've been talking to you back and forth, Justin, about this, I've been texting you, I still say it in that way, mostly because I want to give you the ability to like move on. Like you aren't still in that same place. You're not going to be like 20 forever. And so like I try to create that separation because then I could like one of the things I mentioned was, dude, every time your character comes on the scene, you're described as brooding. And it was really funny. But I don't know,
I was
it's
really going through it that summer, man.
you
There were,
were.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. Like there are really so many people who have gone through that and go through that, and a lot of them don't find a community or don't find people who can hang with them during that.
Means to reconstruct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marie, were you Justin's older sister in the book, watching out for him at that
I
point?
don't know. Was I? I mean, sometimes I was. I remember I was. What was it? 8 years old in farm years. So,
Right. Yeah.
um,
There were times that I was the older brother, even though I'm younger.
I think
Like,
so. Sure.
that I was kind of facilitating, hey, let's go have this experience so you can see this or
Hmm.
learn this. But then, like go visit you in San Francisco and you give me the same kind of experience. So we
I
were
made
able
you
to
eat an
trade
expensive
who was
hamburger.
the, yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And I think I had dim sum for the first time with you. And so
I
we
think we
both
went
got to
straight
be the
from the
older one.
airport to dim sum. Yes.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is never expressed in the book, but I do assume that Marie, you provided this sort of like example that Justin, no matter where you land, you'll be okay, sort of a figure
Hmm.
in his life. And so while it's expressed that in farm years you were only like an 8-year-old and he was taking you under his wing or doing whatever, like I do think that that other side of it was there for sure, or at least it seems like it.
Yeah. I always felt that way. And I always felt respected. Like, yeah, there very much was that, like, yeah, I don't know what you're gonna end up thinking about things. And you even kind of say that, Marie, in the book, where it's like the cultural script is that you're supposed to help me leave faith and go live in a city.
Harvard. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
I
We
think
did. I mean, we did talk about what it would be like if you were to have a different sort of life, because I had been living in New York City. I think by the time I was on the road with you, we were living in San Francisco, but I had lived in New York City for many years before that. So I'd met lots of people who had gone to church or had had very strict religious upbringings, and the accepted narrative there is, I was forced to go to church, or my parents sent me to conversion therapy, or any permutation of this story, and I escaped and went to New York City, and I'm done with all of that. And so I met a lot of people who told their story in that way. So I sort of met them on the other side of this experience. Like, so the escape narrative is sort of the standard narrative that you hear in the city. Although, as I was saying, I now know that privately many people don't want to have such a drastic rupture. They want to be able to maintain their connection to God while also living a life that's very different than the one that they would have been brought up in. But so I wanted Justin to know that that was an option. He didn't have to. He could go to a secular school, a liberal arts college, but also respected that it might not be. But I mean, I think one of the things about working on this book was realizing how broad and how varied American culture is. I mean, I have like a very specific experience. I went to a private school. I went to a college on the East Coast. I mean, I've lived very much in one world. Um, but I think because I always had the farm in the behind me, and because of my father, I was aware that there were other Americas and there was another America. I didn't necessarily know what that was, and so I was able to investigate that more thoroughly.
I never felt Marie saying like, "Oh, come on, like, get out of this." In fact, we were kind of wading into like, what's the deal with this divine mystery together.
Well, I think that's the time that we have, but thank you both for being here.
Well, Marie, head off sometime in the next week and have some sourdough bread for me, please.
Okay. All right. You got it.
Sounds good. Honestly, and Marie, I don't have any specific harvest time of year really to invite you to, but it would be super fun to have you out to my parents' place too. So if you ever do go on harvest again, let me know when you're in Nebraska.
Okay, I will. I will, because it'll only be 4 hours away.
Right, exactly. Which is so close, right?
Or shorter if I go 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for A Different Kind of Walk. The book we discussed today was called American Harvest: God, Country, and Farming in the Heartland by Mutsuki Mockett. You can find it wherever books are sold. Until next time, live well.